So I got an interesting question from a viewer the other day, and it was, well, my internet just popped up. So it was, what's the difference between the P0520 code and the P06dd? P06dd is engine oil pressure is low, but it'll actually give you a circuit code, and it kind of has the same readings as the P0520 code. So what I've noticed with the P0520, it's usually this guy. So this is the oil pressure switch. These do go bad in the older ones. It actually got to the point where it was so bad that those went bad that Snap-on came out with an oil pressure socket. This thing is amazing and has saved me several times. Don't get the impact one, always get the chrome skinny one, because that way you can get into really tough spots. Put that back. And that's pretty much with the 520. The way that you can determine that the switch is still somewhat working is when you look at the oil pressure gauge, that it's fluctuating back and forth between the normal oil pressure, because whenever you start a Chrysler, I've noticed any kind of Chrysler engine, even to include the Cummins, it'll usually start out in the high 30s, low 40s. It'll either start to drop or it'll increase, or it'll stay within that range unless you go to accelerate. Or if you put it into gear, the oil pressure should drop about 5 pounds. Now the P06dd, that is an actual oil pressure code. It's telling you that there's an oil pressure issue. As I was saying, I apologize, our air compressor kicked on. So the reason for P06dd, it could be for a couple reasons. There's low engine oil, the incorrect oil filter, and I'll go over that in a second, what I've seen. Insufficient oil pressure due to like a mechanical failure. The dual stage oil pump solenoid is stuck on, or the oil pump spool valve is stuck. Unfortunately, I don't have an oil pump here to show you, but I will go over what I've seen in the third and fourth generation 3.6 liter. So this was off the first generation 3.6 liter. So the oil filter is a little bit taller. It's got very thick channels compared to the newer one. The newer one actually has a gasket that sits on top, and it rests at the bottom here of this oil filter housing. Now what I've seen is people put this oil filter in there. I'm not going to name any businesses. And they'll just stick that in there as tightly as they can. They'll cut these off and then put the cap back on. It'll work for about not very long. Now, if they have this oil filter housing style, which I don't have one of the older ones, I thought I did, and they have this oil filter, what I've seen a lot of people do is they'll cut this off. It's really hard to do with one hand. They'll cut that off, and then they think that they have this oil filter, but the height is different. Not only that, it already has that tower that's built into the oil filter in the older oil filter housings. And they'll just stick that in there, put the cap on, call it a day, thinking that everything's going to be fine, and it's not. Engine mechanical failure, it's usually these guys. So this is a lifter. This guy right here is a lifter. See the little oil channel right there? And then there's another one up here. That's what lubricates the roller that rides on the camshaft. I've seen these fail, but it's pretty rare that they cause a P06dd code. The other one is obviously a low engine oil. You got a leak somewhere, determine where it is, figure it out from there. The other things that I've seen is a solenoid on the back of the oil pumps. They get clogged up with old oil from oil change intervals that are stretched out way too far, and the solenoid will actually get stuck on. and it'll make it seem like that it's a P0520 because you'll see the oil pressure circuit control circuit stuck on, which the P0520 code, it kind of looks the same, but it says oil pressure switch stuck on. So they would say oil pressure control circuit, and then there's an oil pressure switch. But both of those codes are different because one's a 520, one's a 06dd. What I've seen in the past, especially on these filters, on the 744s, the bottom of these will like to crack because people will just hammer down on that oil filter housing cap, and it'll actually crack the filter. And then someone will go, oh, it needs an oil pump, throw an oil pump in, and they still have the same issue when it's something as simple as just the oil filter. So basically, in the diag that they give us, literally the first thing they say is check for service bulletins or any PCM software updates. The only PCM software updates that I've ever seen for an engine oil pressure problem is for these. It basically controls the circuitry, and so these things will become less of a problem. Oh, the location of these, they're on the back of the oil filter housing. Some of them are easier to get to. Some of them are, I shouldn't say a nightmare. They're not horrible to get to, but they do suck. Then after that, it just goes from like the basis of, you know, like erase the DTC, does it come back right away? Check for related DTCs. So usually 520 and P06dd will show up together. If they show up together, make sure you perform the diagnostics properly. If you get a P06dd, which is basically the circuitry for the oil pump solenoid, that's when you're going to start looking into wires, see if anything's chafed, broken, chewed through, especially where I'm at. But if you have the 520 and the 60dd, and I might be repeating myself, definitely go for the 6dd issue first. See if you have a low engine oil condition. See if you have an engine mechanical issue. Make sure that, you know, it doesn't make any sense to me to go for the oil pressure switch and then determine why you have a 6dd code, P06dd code. And then after that diag, it gets more and more obvious. You know, you're going to check the oil. I don't think I really need to go over checking an oil, but just in case, I have a 3.6 liter here. So checking an oil on a 3.6 liter, it's fairly simple. It's always better to check it when it's cold. Is this a 3.6? Okay, it is a 3.6. Whoa. Yeah, the hood strut shot. Hold on. I got something for that. I was too slow. Okay. Let's try that again. This thing's awesome. I got this from Matco. You can also get them at like hardware, not hardware stores, auto parts stores. You can even use a pair of vice grips. This works pretty well. This did have a flag on it, so I wouldn't forget that it's there, but I've never really had a problem doing that. So the dipstick tube on pretty much any 3.6 is always going to be on the first bank. Yeah, that's a first bank. Yeah, that's a first bank. That's the second bank. Pull the dipstick, wipe it off, and you're going to stick it back into the dipstick tube. Let me give you some light here. I think it's so dumb that I can't use a flashlight on wide lens. Doesn't make any sense. Well, he's low. He's very low. He's about 2 quarts low. This is not my vehicle. This is someone else's. I'm gonna have to mention that. This is like torture trying to watch this go back in. There we go. So if you had a P06dd code and that was the situation that you're in, That would be the first thing that I'd want to look at. Why am I low on oil? It's been a while since I've had an oil change. Let's actually find out and see how long it's been since this guy's had an oil change. So, 121167. It's not going to tell me, is it? 12226. Okay, he's not bad. He's 1,000 miles overdue. That's not the worst. I would take the oil filter off on this so you can actually see the housing, because this is a first generation housing, and you can see the difference between the newer generation, which is over there, compared to this one. But I'm not going to do that because don't have approval. It's a life of a technician not having approval for something. So yeah, the other thing that I've seen a lot when it comes to the P06dd is literally from oil sludge. So oil sludge likes to rest at the bottom of the oil pan, and the solenoid, I really wish I had an oil pump here so I could show you it. But the solenoid, it kind of just sits on the back of the oil pump. It's literally a 2-wire circuit, and if that gets caked up in oil, and that seems to be like the one thing that's like attracted to like dirty oil. Like you'll pull an oil pump and the oil pump will have like normal wear and tear on it, but if you have the solenoid, it's just caked with crap. So that solenoid will actually get covered up and backed up, and it will jam up the screens that are on the inside. And then, of course, the end-all, be-all, if you have that problem, you got something wrong with the rod bearings on the crankshaft, because that's basically how an engine creates oil pressure. It doesn't come from the oil pump. It comes from the gaps in between where the crankshaft and the bearings are. That's how pressure is created. That even works on top of where the engine is. If it's an overhead cam, where the camshaft bearings go, that's where oil pressure is also created too. So don't get that confused. The oil pump just creates the volume, makes the movement. It doesn't create pressure. The pressure comes from the bearings on the crankshaft. So if basically all of those, like from the low oil, you can't find a leak, all of your electrics are good, you know that this is working properly, which is this is the oil pressure switch that sits on the back of the housing of an oil filter housing in a 3.6 liter. If you know all of those are good, you know you have a fresh oil change, you know your oil filter's okay. Well, that one's obviously not, so that's gonna go, whoop, I missed. If you know all of that is good, then you're looking at an oil pump. And some oil pumps are easier to do than others. Like the Dodge Avenger, easy. You can do that in your driveway, no problem. The Grand Cherokee, it kind of sucks because you can have there's two ways of approaching it. You can drop the subframe, or you can drop the differential and go through it through the oil pan. So the oil pump on the 3.6 liter is all the way at the bottom on through the upper pan. So you got to take the lower and upper pan off, and then it sits right there and it rides on the timing chain. It doesn't necessarily need to be timed. You can literally just take the tensioner off and then remove the chain. Well, don't remove the chain because the chain rides on the crankshaft, and that's more of a headache than you need to deal with. And then remove the pump, remove the cock. I really hope this answers your question that I got from that viewer, and I wish I remember your name. I'll put you in the description, I promise. And I hope you fix your car. Thanks for watching.